Let's look at the blue-black tempo mirror. So with 13% meta share, it's the most played deck right now. So if you play it, of course, you will face the mirror a lot. Also, most of you chose it in the poll when I asked which I should cover first. And of course, on average, you have a 50% win rate in the mirror, but your personal win rate may be much different. So of course, I'm not Wizards of the Coast. I don't have millions or thousands of matches statistics. So I cannot prove it to you that it's not just a coin flip, but I have some stats. So I played around 700 matches with the deck and have 60% win rate. And I didn't write it down for each matchup, but I just went over the last 15 mirror matches in my recordings and went 11-4. So this is a very low sample size, but intuitively I would say that experience matters maybe even more than against the average opponent, because there are a lot of factors under your control. So in my opinion, it's not just a coin flip, but feel free to write if you disagree. But I think this is actually very difficult to teach and learn the mirror, because it's just playing good Magic in general, right? And this is a hard thing to do. You may just see the match win, but behind that there are lots of skills that you need. Maybe the easiest of them in this matchup are like deck construction, because you can just take the deck of someone else. Sideboarding is quite easy because you can just follow a guide. Mulliganing is also quite simple, I would say. But there are a few difficult things. So for example, do I go for basics or do I go for duels in this specific game? And how do I answer my removal spells with the opponent's threats, right? Sometimes you have like a snuff out and a push, and you need to know like which do you use on which creature and which order. Maybe you ignore a Bowmaster, do play more for mana efficiency or more for like having a safety net for example, the opponent plays a Nethergoyf later, so maybe you don't kill the Bowmaster. And this is really, really context dependent. So each game is very different. You also have, especially if you don't play with Nethergoyf, a lot of grindy long matches. So the clock management is also important, so you don't go out of time. So let's go for clock management first, because I think that is an aspect that many people don't realize. So of course, in paper, you should just play as quickly as possible. So you shouldn't aim to play the perfect game of Magic, because I recently told someone in a paper event that we will go into a draw, and the opponent says, yeah, but I need to play perfectly. And in my opinion, the goal is not to play perfect Magic, but to play the best Magic that you can, given the constraints of the time. So in paper, you just have to play at an appropriate speed, and if you don't, it's like either slow play, or if you do it intentionally, it's cheating, so don't do that. But on Magic Online, it's completely different. There, everyone has their own clock. There is no extra turns, and time is a resource, right? Maybe you played in like chess tournaments or Go tournaments, and there it's completely normal, for example, that you can choose to use the timer for yourself in a specific way. For example, you can say, I play quickly in the early game, so you have more time in the late game for complicated things. Or maybe I have less time than the opponent, so I choose a simple line, or I have more time, so I choose a complicated line, so it will take more time. So this is all really abstract and not mirror specific, right? But let's give a specific example here. So I was playing against Minya Friend. I lost in the Swiss to him, and here we face again in the quarterfinals. I won game 1, and this is game 2, so sideboarded. And I'm in a weak position, but I'm 30 or 40 seconds up on the opponent, and I manage here to stay alive for a long time. I ultimately did not win game 2, but I was up a lot on time, so the opponent was down to 2 minutes and I was down to 7. So I think it's really important in the mirror to look at the clock. And here in this example, I also sideboarded differently than normal, so I just kept in all my force of wills, because I thought, well, force is usually bad because it's bad in a long game, but here we won't have a long game. So I just one here on the timer and on the board as well, and your opponent did not think about Force of Will. Yeah, so this is an example in the mirror that you have to be really careful with the clock, both in paper and on Magic Online.
Oh, that's awesome.
Creature, ponder, instant, land.
Faster!
No, we're good, we're good.
Let's go, F6, F6, F6.
I do.
2, 1.
We're
so
go!
Oh my
Let's
God.
fucking go!
Whoa!
There.
And maybe this sounds frustrating for you because you say, yeah, I know I need to play faster, I just don't know how. So this is also important to know how you can actually free up mental capacity. So my advice is to just play a lot of blue-black tempo, but there's also a certain point, like if you play hundreds of matches, you should also stop and analyze the games. But first you need to play a lot with the same deck. If you know your deck inside and out, it's twice as important for the mirror, because then you also know mostly how your opponent's deck list operates. And my advice also to commit your 75, so your deck list and your sideboard a few days before an important event, so you just have everything on autopilot, and then you can focus your energy on the opponent, and you know what do their plays tell you. You can cover or hide your weakness, for example to Wasteland, or make them play into your strength. So this is true for every matchup, but I think it's very important mostly in the mirror, because you have the same pieces and sometimes it's really context dependent. Like, do you have the first Bowmaster? Do you want them to bait them into playing their Bowmaster, and so on, right? And another way to save time is if you build your own heuristics or you learn them from someone, like from me in this guide. For example, I played against a friend called Jörg, and he killed my Barrowgolf using Nihil Spellbomb to clear my graveyard, and then he pinged the Murktide, the Barrowgolf with Bowmaster, and then cleared his own graveyard with Murktide. This was a really cool sequence, and I just saved this into my brain as the Jörg maneuver. And if you block or group elements like this, it allows you to have more free mental space. But of course, you need to be open-minded, because in the mirror there are so many different combinations of things that can happen. So if you have not much time, of course, you can just play by intuition or by heuristics. But if you have enough time, you just use those as a starting point, and then you can actually examine each situation in detail and try to find the best line for this specific one. Sideboarding is also something that you can just prepare beforehand, so you're not stressed and don't use up the clock in the match. Of course, you can always vary it a little bit based on, for example, the clock, or if you want to surprise your opponent. But in general, Force of Will is bad because it's a card disadvantage and can be a bad top deck. And you bring in, for example, in my case, it's the Barrowgolfs and the Sheoldred's Edicts, but you may have a different list, or the mapping works out differently, so you just want to bring in all the creatures, the threats, and all the removal, and also value Gravehead. So of course, not something like Surgical Extraction or Leyline of the Void, but cards like Dauthi Voidwalker, Nihil Spellbomb, or Unlicensed Hers are really good, because I mean, especially good if they play with Nethergoyf, but also preventing a Murktide is also very, very valuable. But yeah, if they play with Nethergoyf, then those cards are more valuable. If they play without it, maybe a bit less. And if they have a list that has only Barrowgolfs and no Nethergoyfs and no Murktides, then maybe something like Ghost Vacuum isn't worth it. But I haven't seen such a list much. And also, if you have Force of Negation in the main, of course you cut that too. And if you still need more cuts, you can also shave on Thoughtseize and Daze. So if I play 4 Thoughtseize, I often like to go down to 3. And depending on play draw, you can also like shave the third or the second Daze. Now let's look at the threats. So I'm not suggesting to completely sell out and optimize your threat suite only for the mirror, because they all have their pros and cons. So I think you should just look at your meta in total and make decisions based on that, and then see how you can make that work in the mirror. So for example, if you have a Nethergoyf based list with Mishra's Bauble, you try to win quickly and win with Days Wasteland. But if you have Barrowgoyf, then maybe don't wasteland the opponent, but instead go for the long game. But there's one exception. There are certain builds of Ube Tempo with no Tamiyo and no Kaito, and instead with Delver of Secrets that are made to beat combo. And I think those are really, really weak in the mirror, so I would avoid that. But otherwise, I think many combinations make sense, but I'm currently on 4 Tamiyo for the blue mirrors. And I either play 3 Bowmasters or 4 with Nethergoyf. And if I don't play with Nethergoyf and instead with Barrowgoyf and Murktide main, then I play 4 Bowmasters as well. And yeah, because we already covered all the creatures in the guide, in the general guide, I'm not going that much into detail, but I'm just going to tell you some specific threat and removal interactions or threat on threat interactions that I think are especially relevant in the mirror. The most confusing threat is certainly Kaito. So when it was new, you could always surprise people. And even nowadays, sometimes I still forget that my opponent can Kaito me if they have 3 mana up. So it's often a good play to play the 3rd land before attacking if you have some attacker, because then you represent Kaito. And even if you don't have it, that means bluffing it opens the opportunity for your opponent to screw up. Maybe they use a fatal push on an orc army or something like that, or you can just in general make them make bad decisions. And something that often comes up is Kaito and Sheoldred's Edict. So this is here a rules question for you. Now Blue-Black Tempo is out for a long time, maybe you already know it, but to make sure, if you get attacked with Kaito and it's a ninja and you use Sheoldred's Edict on the Planeswalker mode, what will happen? Please pause the video until you know the answer or think what the answer is, and then we can continue. So the relevant rules text here is the rules 205.1a, which is that if an effect changes an object's card type, then in most cases the new card types replaces any existing card types. So there are some exceptions, for example with artifact creatures, that makes this a bit unintuitive. However, this means that Kaito becomes a creature and loses both the Planeswalker type and the Kaito subtype. So you can see this really well if you play on Magic Online, because there, you see it here on the lower left, the Planeswalker and Kaito becomes grayed out. And so this means if you play Sheoldred's Edict and choose the Planeswalker mode, the Edict will resolve, but nothing will happen. Number 1, do they have a days? But they kept days in. Okay, we have to force. Why do people never follow the sideboard guides? It would make it so much easier. What? Why didn't it? Second rules question. You get attacked by a 3/4 Kaito with 2 loyalty counters on it. You block with a Murktide Regent. First question, will the loyalty counters be removed or will they stay? And second, will Kaito die or not? Please pause the video. Alright, so you can see this on Gatherer. While he's a creature, damage dealt to him won't cause loyalty counters to be removed. And this is really unintuitive to me, because you can still activate Kaito's loyalty abilities. So I always thought, well, if you activate Planeswalker abilities, it should still be a Planeswalker, right? But as we saw in the rules question before, it's not a Planeswalker. And so the loyalty abilities will not be removed. And this would be different if it was a Planeswalker and a creature at the same time. So there are some Planeswalkers that can become creatures and stay Planeswalkers at the same time. In this case, they would lose the loyalty abilities and take damage at the same time and then would die. But this is not true for Kaito. Another play that comes up in the mirror sometimes is that you sacrifice a creature to bring in Kaito. So here the opponent is tapped out. So the opponent has a Dauthi and they will probably block the Orcish Bowmaster, and then I will ninjutsu in Kaito using the Orc army. So I sacrifice both the Bowmasters and the Orc army, and I give the opponent 5 life just to put in my Kaito. But here in this spot, I think it's too risky if I play my own Dauthi because the opponent could have a daze or a push or some other removal spell or their own Kaito. So here I think it's worth it to tap Dauthi, but of course this also means that the opponent could then use their Tamiyo back to bring in their Kaito and kill my Kaito, but sometimes you don't have much of a choice. But I know it's turn 4, yeah, I wastelanded, so I cannot play another land and play the Nethergoyf here, and using the tap, the stun counter ability, Kaito will of course go down to 2. And it's also important to know that if you want to stun something twice without Kaito to die, you need to use the minus ability, then the next turn you use the plus to +3, and then you use the -2 again. Now, if you do play with Dauthi Voidwalker on the board, it's really nice at preventing Nethergoyf from growing big or Murktide regions from entering. And it's also nice as a build your own control magic. If you have an untapped Dauthi Voidwalker without Summoning Sickness and a Swordseize, with the exception being if the opponent has Brazen Borer, then it's not really advised. But often you can bring in the Dauthi Voidwalker and upgrade him or it to a Dauthi. Now we come to another rules question here. What happens if you have a Dauthi Voidwalker in play and the opponent has a Dauthi? So important texts here are from Dauthi Voidwalker. If a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, instead excited with a void counter. And the Dauthi says, whenever Dauthi deals combat damage to a player, you may mill that many cards. If you do, you may put a creature card from among them into your hand. What will happen? Please pause the video until you have the answer. Okay, and the resolution is the rule 70117C says, an effect that refers to a milled card can find that card in the zone it moved to from the library as long as that zone is a public zone. And the face-up exile is a public zone, so the cards will go into the void exile or into the exile with a void counter, but the Dauthi will still be able, or the player will still be able to return one of those cards to hand. Of course, it's still risky that the cards go into the void and may be usable by the Voidwalker player. And another rules question, well, this one is probably very easy, so I'm going to reveal it here. If you have Dauthi Voidwalker and the opponent has a Nihil Spellbomb, then the Nihil Spellbomb will not be able to draw a card because it's not put into a graveyard but instead exiled. So if you have a Fatal Push, for example, it's advisable to push the Dauthi Voidwalker first and then crack your Nihil Spellbomb if you have the extra black to draw a card. And here's an example from a recent mirror match where the Voidwalker was really doing work. So I have a commanding board position, but I'm playing the big variant with Dauthi while my opponent plays the small version with Nethergoyf, and they even have Murktide in hand. But I have a bunch of small creatures, so I'm weak to Murktide plus Daze or Murktide plus Force or something like this. But the Voidwalker here can guarantee that even on turn 6 they only have a single card in the graveyard. So my threat of having a big Nethergoyf or Murktide against me is really, really low because the opponent has to kill the Dauthi Voidwalker first. Now, you may both play with Nethergoyfs, so there could be some interesting Nethergoyf mirrors coming up. So most of the time you do have a sorcery like Ponder or Swordseize, so often they are both 4/5. So of course the one with the bigger Nethergoyf has a big advantage, and often their artifact rules the mirror. So my advice is, if you play with Nethergoyf, also consider playing a few Mishra's Baubles, because then you very often have a 5/6 where the opponent has 4/5, and this is really, really strong in the mirror. You could also play Nihil Spellbomb, but I currently don't do that because of the decline of Blue-Black Reanimator after Entomb ban. But yeah, if you have Nihil Spellbomb in the main or in the board, then of course this completely dominates the Nethergoyf mirrors. If you have smaller Goyfs, you can often set up a double block, but that's really risky because a removal can just wipe out your whole board. So let's look at a typical Nethergoyf situation in detail. Here we both have 4 card types, instant, sorcery, creature, land, and we both have a Nethergoyf in play. I have a Kaito, Brazen Borrower, Tamiyo and Bowmaster in hand, so lots of options here, lots of things to think about. My opponent has 2 unknown cards in hand and 3 mana available, so yeah, please think about all the cards that the opponent could have here that are relevant in this situation, how we play around it and what we can do. So think about what you would do and pause the video, and then let's unpause and compare to what actually happened in the video. So first, to resolve what the cards could be that your opponent has in hand that are relevant for this turn, right? You could also think several turns ahead, but just cards that your opponent could play right now are of course instants and flash creatures. So Brainstorm to flip Tamiyo is an option. Removal spells like Fatal Push or Snuff Out or Sheoldred's Edict. Then there are the flash creatures Orcish Bowmasters and the Brazen Borer and Petty Theft. And of course we have to think about the opponent potentially wastelanding us. So how do we proceed here? So it's interesting to know that if I attack here with both creatures, then I threaten Kaito. However, the opponent has a wasteland, so if the opponent is on point, the opponent could actually wasteland my Undercity sewers in my begin combat or attack step. So in hindsight, I think I should have used the island to ponder, or maybe, no, not the island. I think the best play here would be to ponder with the Undercity sewers, so I can't be wastelanded, and then hope to find a fetchland or a wasteland. And both the fetchland would allow me to bring in Kaito if the opponent doesn't block, and the wasteland would at least make this a favorable trade. So if I would ponder, find a wasteland, and then pass into the attack step, the opponent would wasteland my wasteland, and I could waste the Underground Sea, and this would be a good trade for me. However, in this specific example, I didn't see this line here and attacked without going for the ponder first, which I think in hindsight is a mistake. However, the opponent did go for the block here. So I think now in hindsight, maybe the opponent should not have blocked at all, right? Just wasteland my sewers and then just let it through, because here the Orcish Bowmaster could be the mirror breaker. However, we also have to think about a potential brainstorm from the opponent. So what happened here is the opponent blocks the Orc Army token with Tamiyo. So now this means, because it's still the block step and now not the damage step, I can now play Orcish Bowmasters to ping Tamiyo and then grow the Orc Army to 2/2 and thus kill Tamiyo. However, the problem is the opponent can respond with a Brainstorm to evade both the 3 Bowmaster triggers and also to save Tamiyo. The other option is to kill the opponent's Nethergoyf with the Bowmaster. Alright, so here we attack with both, and I went to the second main phase. The marked damage is not shown here on the screen. I think this is just Magic Online not showing it, but Tamiyo has 1 marked damage and Nethergoyf has 2 marked damage points. So here I go for the Orcish Bowmaster in the second main, and the opponent responds with a Brainstorm to flip Tamiyo. and I at least kill the Nethergoyf. So this exchange is favorable for me because I end up killing the opponent's Nethergoyf. However, now in hindsight, I think I could play it a bit better. So first, if I use the Bowmaster beforehand, then we could prevent the opponent from flipping Tamiyo with the Brainstorm, because if I use the Bowmaster in the first main phase and the opponent uses the Brainstorm in return, then we can attack with the Nethergoyf and the Orc army to 2 token to kill Tamiyo. However, I'm not sure that's the best play either, because if the opponent has Orcish Bowmasters in hand, then it's also not great. So in hindsight, I think the best play would have been to ponder with Undercity Sewers, trying to find fetchland or wasteland, but I'm interested what you think. I think this is a really complicated situation. Maybe you find some other play that's even better than what I would have done here. And of course, the difficult position we want to put our opponent in is that we threaten both Kaito and the Bowmaster on the same turn, right? Otherwise, I think here, the way I played it, the opponent has the really easy out of just wastelanding my Suros and not blocking at all. And if you want to ninjutsu in Kaito, but you have a 4-5 Nethergoyf, you do 1 more damage if you use ninjutsu in the damage step. So remember to put stops on your attack, block and damage steps, because all 3 of those can be used to ninjutsu in Kaito, and using ninjutsu in the damage step is also a way that you can use a Barrowgoyf to get the Barrowgoyf trigger and bring in Kaito at the same time. However, that's not always worth it, because sometimes it's better to keep the Barrowgoyf. So Nethergoyf is a bit vulnerable to getting chump blocked, as is Barrowgoyf, but if you get chump blocked by an Orc army and they have a Bowmaster and you have a clue, that then if your Goyf is large enough, you can just pop the clue if they don't have enough mana for another Bowmaster or something. And then you can just make the Orc army a 2-2, which you don't care about. They can assign 1 damage to you, but it's really nice timing to crack a clue. Now for Tamiyo, I don't have many slides because most of the Tamiyo stuff is not matchup specific, but if you have something, then please share it in the comments. Just a few things on top of my mind, the usual stuff, right? If the opponent tries to kill Tamiyo, for example, with a fatal push, that you can save her with the Brainstorm, or you can do the same to the opponent. It's all a mirror, right? And you have to be careful with Orcish Bowmasters when brainstorming to save Tamiyo, so you can like lead the opponent into a bad play, or you can like try to get the opponent to flip her and then attack, or you can use the Bowmasters on the opponent's ultimate, or you can like use your own Tamiyo to rebuy a removal spell. This in turn also triggers Murktide. Also, what's maybe interesting is that the Tamiyo minus ability does not apply to something brought in with ninjutsu. So if the opponent has 3 loyalty abilities Tamiyo lying around, then you can kill her with your own Tamiyo, for example, bringing in Kaito with ninjutsu. That's maybe interesting to know, but otherwise, please write in comment if you have cool mirror specific tips. One interesting rules question is what happens if the opponent attacks with Baleful Strix. You want to prevent possible Kaito, and the Baleful Strix is a 0-1. Please pause and think about your response. So the response is, the correct answer is that Death Touch only applies on non-zero amounts of combat damage. So maybe it should not be called Death Touch, but Death Hit, because a 0-3 Moonwalk can touch someone, maybe doesn't do much damage in a boxing match, but yeah. Other than that, that's all I have for Tamiyo here. Please feel free to write more Tamiyo specific matchup tips in the comments. Now, Orcish Bowmasters, you both have them, so generally you want to be the one to play your Bowmasters last, right? Maybe you can draw out a Bowmaster by playing a brainstorm or something, and making sure the opponent cannot just daze your Bowmasters or something. So you try to catch your opponent's draw spells. If your Bowmaster, the opponent tries to do the same, like popping a clue token or something. And because you don't have a combo, it's often very hard to get back into the game if the opponent manages to catch your brainstorm with the Bowmasters. But sometimes there are rare situations, like here in this clip or in this image, the opponent has me dead if they just find a removal, so they do brainstorm into my known Bowmaster just to find a removal spell, which they do manage to hit to kill the Brazen Borer, and then they win the match or the game. Now for deck construction, I don't want to cover the complete deck because we already have a guide for that as a video and the big community page. But removal I think is really interesting, especially there's a really nice section contributed by Luke, aka Doggy Bones 35, on removal with a focus on the mirrors. Of course, we have to cover this. So our main removal is of course Fatal Push, because it kills most of the important creatures. And specifically in the mirror, the revolt doesn't come up that often, but when it comes up, it's mostly when you want to kill Barrogoyfs and Brazen Borers, so Barrogoyfs more than that. And yeah, so usually it's really painless to get revolt if you have a fetch land or wasteland or Mishra's Bauble. So these are often things that you want to crack anyways. However, sometimes maybe you keep it back because you may need it. And if you get more and more desperate, there are more and more ways you can use to get revolt. So for example, if the opponent doesn't have non-basic lands, you can actually waste your own land, or you can fetch even though you don't have a fetchable land left in your deck. You can crack a clue, that is usually not a problem. You can actually flip Tamiyo, because Revolt talks about permanence leaving the battlefield, so it doesn't need to die. Then Ninjutsu with Kaito works. You can, in a pinch, even use Orcish Bowmasters to ping itself, though. So there are some creative ways that you can sometimes use to enable Fatal Push, but other than that, it's quite straightforward. Only exception maybe is that, of course, you need to be careful with Tamiyo because they can flip her with a brainstorm. But sometimes you can mitigate that. For example, if it's your turn and you have a bunch of attackers, if you push Tamiyo and they flip her with a brainstorm, then the plus ability is not active and she only has 2 loyalty, though that's a way around it. But I think that's most of the tricks. There aren't many like crazy tricks you can do with Fatal Push. But yeah, try to not forget about a revolt. So here's an example. So this is not to throw shade on my opponent. It's just the first screenshot I found or video I found of this happening. So sometimes you're tired. It happens to the best of us. We just accidentally use Fatal Push without revolt active, and the way this rules work that a creature with more mana cost is a wallet target, but the spell just doesn't do anything. So yeah, try to not let that happen. You often lose on the spot. So then there's my favorite removal spell, Sheoldred's Edict, especially because it's so flexible. So it's maybe not the best in this matchup, even though it's useful that you have a way to get rid of Kaito, for example, sometimes. But I like it more because it's also good against creatures in other matchups with Ward or Hexproof or Indestructible or whatever. So in my opinion, it's best to not sell out to beat the mirror overly much, even though the mirror right now is the most common matchup. But I think most of the removal spells work to some extent. So I think even if you, for example, have a local meta of 15% blue-black tempo at 10% lands, then I would still like respect the lands matchup more with Sheoldred's Edict, because there it's more black and white, right? Against lands, if you want to get rid of Marut, then, for example, Snuff Out just does nothing, or Shoot the Sheriff, but Sheoldred's Edict works really, really well. Whereas Sheoldred's Edict is a bit unreliable in the mirror, but it still works, right? So Sheoldred's Edict can kill Tamiyo on both sides, Kaito the creature on the owner's turn, Kaito the planeswalker on the opponent's turn, Murktide, Dauthi, what have you, Orcish Bowmasters, or the army in a pinch. But of course, you have to beware of flash, and sometimes you cannot kill the creature that you want because the opponent has multiples and they of course choose the one which is least important. So here is an example where the opponent was attacking me with Kaito as a creature in their turn, right? So here they used ninjutsu on the Orcish Bowmaster. So in this case, I could use it. I could use Sheoldred's Edict here and kill Kaito, but it wouldn't have worked otherwise if they used ninjutsu on the Orc army instead. Then we have Brazen Borer, which is really, really nice to bounce stuff. Again, if you only would want to focus on your local meta and it's 100% UB tempo, then probably wouldn't play Brazen Borer. This is more something where you can, for example, get rid of Chalice of the Void or something. But it's only temporarily, except if you combo it with Thoughtseize as a build your own Vindicate. But yeah, in a pinch, it also works as a threat to pressure planeswalkers or things like this. Also, sometimes bouncing something is even better than killing it, specifically if it's something that belongs to you. This is a really rare situation in the mirror, but for example, if your opponent has a Dauthi Voidwalker, and so here in this case, I'm the one with the Voidwalker and I'm interested in upgrading, so to speak, my Dauthi Voidwalker to a Nethergoyf because there's a damage race going on. However, because I see the opponent has Brazen Borer, they could just bounce it and use it against me, so this option is not available. So Dauthi Voidwalker, not the most played creature in the mirror, but just helpful to think about. Then there's Dismember, which I really don't like. So this is mostly something that you play if there's a lot of mono-red prison around, so you can kill the Magus of the Moon. So for example, cannot kill Kaito or Tamiyo in Planeswalker form, and it also has problems dealing with Murktide, but maybe with some creativity, maybe with Murktide, like, I don't know, Bowmaster ping plus Dismember or something. So sometimes it works, but yeah, Dismember, not the biggest fan of that one. Then there's a Bitter Triumph. I also don't really like it in general, like not only against the mirror, because using it as a discard outlet is largely wasted in this case. So it used to be really good in Blue-Black Reanimator. But yeah, sometimes you can maybe discard something to enable playing a Murktide Regent or something. But in general, I think it's not really worth it. Maybe you have to send back a land in this case if you play with this. So a late game drawn Bitter Triumph isn't useless if you are low on life. So yeah, not a big fan of that. Then there is Shoot the Sheriff, which kills most things in the mirror except Dauthi Voidwalker because it's a rogue, Kaito because it has hexproof, and is a planeswalker alternately depending on the turn, Tamiyo as a planeswalker, and Brazen Borer because it's also a rogue. Then there's Go for the Throat, which kills all the creatures except Kaito as a creature because it has hexproof and doesn't kill planeswalkers. And then there's Feed the Cycle, which is flexible, but I don't really like it if you run Nethergoyf and or Murktide. So maybe if you only play with Barrogoyfs and have no Murktides and no Nethergoyf, then maybe, but otherwise I'm not a big fan, but yeah, it can depend on if it's good or not. So here in this example, the opponent manages to forage 3 lands. So the size of Nethergoyf does not change and the opponent does not want to play into a potential daze. So here it's not a big problem. However, here in the next example, the opponent doesn't have a second black mana and also has to get rid of Brazen Boar, Ponder, and Polluted Delta. And we know the opponent has a Murktide Regent in hand, so in this case, here this is actually a real downside with Feed the Cycle that the opponent has to exile the cards from the graveyard. Then there is Snuff Out, which misses Bowmasters, Orc Army, Nethergoyf, and Barrowgoyf. Lots of black creatures around, and also 4 life is a lot. But sometimes really useful that doesn't cost mana, because, for example, you can ponder into Snuff Out on Tamiyo, or like snuff out your opponent's Tamiyo and playing your own Tamiyo. And I think most important, having something that kills Murktide Regent is really, really nice, because getting rid of a Murktide Regent effectively is often a really difficult proposition in this deck, because your bread and butter removal spell of Fatal Push cannot kill Murktide Regent. And sometimes you can also hardcast it. So for example, here I only have 4 life, so I managed to destroy the opponent's Murktide Regent, even so I'm only on 4 life here. And actually I'm making a little mistake here, so maybe you pause the video here and you can tell me if this is a mistake or not and what I mean. So I assume you have paused a while and found the reason. So what I did here in this example is I did not fetch with the Flooded Strand before using the Snuff Out. And I know from an earlier Thoughtseize, we can see it here in the revealed cards zone, that the opponent did have a Daze at some point. However, I wasn't diligent here with my cards in hand situation, so the opponent did resolve a Brainstorm at some point, so I assume the opponent got rid of the Daze. However, if the opponent has the Daze, they can now Wasteland my Flooded Strand. This is called the Daze Wasteland trick. And now they can Daze my Snuff Out if they have it, and then they probably win the match, right? So, however, if I assume they don't have a Daze, it's also important to know that I'm on 4 life and the opponent represents an attack for 3. So I think I managed to win the game here with both of us being at 1 life. I think I drew Orcish Bowmasters or something. So it may not be a mistake, but I definitely did not think about this in the game. So it's important to think about that the Daze Wasteland trick exists. And a small clarification, I realized after recording that I said you can wasteland your own land. So what I meant is you can wasteland your own wasteland. That is a valid play, or you can also wasteland your opponent's fetch land sometimes. Alright, for the early game, I really don't like mulliganing, only if I have a really non-functional hand with like only a wasteland as a land, or like 6 lands in a Kaito, or basic swamp, or and no blue source, something like this. But I usually keep a really big range of hands and just hope the deck delivers, because it has so many threats and answers in the mirror. And for land sequencing, it's really, really interesting. Sometimes you want to go for duels if you already have duels in hand. Sometimes like you have 1 fetch and 1 basic, then often it's good to go for basics, but always depends. Like, do you play a variant with Hymn to Tuak, then you need double black, or you have a lot of double blue cards, like 3 or 4 Murktides, then maybe you're really heavy on double blue. And if you go for basics and 1 duel, it's easy for the opponent to cut you off. Also, sometimes you want to really go for the turn 3 play, especially if you play a Barrowgoyf main variant, that, for example, you start on basic island, basic swamp fetchland or something like this. So, but yeah, I just want to show you a lot of early games. I really tried to speed the games up a lot after the early games. So please just look at the decisions based on land sequencing and land fetch targets. And yeah, I'm really interested what your comments are. So with no further narrations, I will just show you a lot of those matches, and I'm really interested what you think. Okay, now viewer questions. So, should I force Tamiyo on a draw if I don't have Fatal Push in hand? Does it change if the opponent starts on Underground Sea and I have Wasteland in hand? So yes, Wastelanding on the draw is not great in the mirror, especially if the opponent has an active Tamiyo, because then they can draw a lot of cards later with the clue, or maybe they flip Tamiyo and win with an ultimate. So I can understand the impulse, but for me it depends more on what other cards in hand. So in this example here, I have the Murktide, which I can't really play early because I have no cantrips and no fetch lands. So I think here forcing the Tamiyo using the pitch card of the Murktide is fine. But in the second example, I would need to pitch my own Tamiyo, so I think I would let the Tamiyo through. I'm not sure how I would exactly continue, whether with the Wasteland and Bauble or Goyf plus Bauble to pressure Tamiyo, or my own Tamiyo, whether I want to flip my own Tamiyo on my turn 2 using the Bauble plus the Clue Crack. I also would like to find another blue card. Also depends on if I draw a blue card or not, so I'm not super sure how I would play it out, but I would definitely I would definitely force Tamiyo here in the first case, but not in the second. And now look at an actual game. Here I play against Super Casola on the draw against the Tamiyo. I don't have Wasteland, I don't have an early threat, and I don't have a push, so I decide to force pitch Ponder, I think, and the opponent dazes back. So the opponent keeps Tamiyo, but at least we switched who has one land more, right? So I have here the Bloodstained Mire in play. Opponent goes for the Thoughtseize. I respond with a Brainstorm and find a Fatal Push. And because of the daze and the basic Swamp, the opponent now has no possibility to like daze my Brainstorm or like play their own Brainstorm or something like this. So I hide the push on top of the library and next turn go for the push, and your opponent gets one clue, but I keep the situation under control. Then I manage to find another Murktide, and my Undercity Sewers finds a Bowmasters, which is really nice solution to Baleful's tricks. However, unfortunately, the opponent manages to sneak in a Kaito before I can deploy the Bowmasters. So now I'm in a really weak spot. The opponent plays another Baleful's plays the Baleful's tricks out again, right? That's the one that the ninjutsu to hand earlier. And I make a big mistake here, which is that I cast my Orcish Bowmaster in response to the Baleful's tricks. So there's a big sequencing error. So my thought process was that I can ping the opponent and then I get another ping and kill the Baleful's tricks, but I should have, of course, waited until the Baleful's tricks resolved and cast my Orcish Bowmaster in response to the draw trigger and not to the tricks itself. So the opponent pounces on my big game losing mistake here and casts their own Orcish Bowmasters in response to the triggered ability, kills my Bowmasters, and now I don't have a chance to come back into this game and I lose. But I still think it was correct of me to force the Tamiyo. That was not the game losing move, I think, in this case. But yeah, feel free to write in comments what you think. Listener question number 2. Should I use Fatal Push or Daze early against Orcish Bowmasters or keep it in reserve for Barrowgolf if I'm playing against a variant without Nethergoyf? And that's a good question because Bowmasters can really be a hit or miss. So active Barrowgolf from the opponent is always super threatening unless you have a lot of jump blockers, but Bowmasters can be the best card in the game if, for example, you try to ultimate Tamiyo or there are Baleful's Strixen, but sometimes you have a damage race going on with Murktides and Barrowgolfs, and the Bowmasters almost don't do anything. So this is really context dependent. So it depends, like, do you have an alternative to handle Barrowgolf? Am I about to draw extra cards, or can I largely ignore the Bowmasters? Can I use my mana effectively? How likely am I to win? Like, if I'm really desperate, then maybe I play differently then if Barrowgolf is my only way to lose, then maybe I keep my removal. And for days, it's also important, would the Bowmasters ping kill something? Do I have another land drop lined up? Maybe I can even save my land from a potential wasteland, and can I clear the way for Kaito? So here in this example, I think it's a really clear upside of dazing the opponent's Bowmaster. First, I'm preventing my Bowmaster from dying. Second, I can potentially save my Underground Sea from a potential opponent's wasteland. However, here in another game, we have this damage race where my Barrowgolfs raise the opponent's Murktide regions, and I do have 2 Fatal Pushs in hand, but I decide to take the daze away from the opponent, ignore the Bowmasters, and just play my own Murktide Regent and just try to win the damage race, ignoring the Brainstorm that I have in hand here for now. And listener question number 3, how much should I play around days? When in doubt, without a way to respond with my own counter, should I still try to get my spell resolved or be disciplined? And this also depends. So sorry, I always don't like it depends as a cop-out answer, but in this case, there are really many factors to consider. Like how many blind drawn unknown cards does the opponent have in hand? For example, maybe I used Thoughtseize earlier. Did they have an opportunity 2 days before that but didn't do it? How important was this opportunity? What's the casting cost of my spells, right? Like playing around days can have multiple meanings. For example, maybe I play my weak spell and try to play my really good spell next turn. In the extreme, where I could either cast my spell or do nothing, I actually play into days a lot, because in this matchup you often end up with extra cards in hand because you have so many card draw spells like Tamiyo Clues or Tamiyo Buyback or Kaito ability. So I think it's very often the case that I just would rather cast my spells. But for example, maybe Hymn to Turak would be the best move, but they could have a daze and they have like 7 unknown cards. Then maybe I just play 2 Nethergoyfs. So playing around days can have different extremes, right? Or maybe I just crack a clue instead of playing into days, then at least I do something with my mana. Or maybe I can play around days by playing a wasteland, casting my spell, and then wasting the opponent, so I don't have wasted mana. Or maybe the opponent only has a single blue source, then I can also sometimes just waste the opponent's Underground Sea and then play my spell and play around days with that kind of play, right? So what's the CMC of my spells is really important. So with potentially game-winning Barrowgolf, I'm much more safe than if I can just multi-spell cheap spells, like if I play, again, like 2 Nethergoyfs instead of Hymn to Turak. It's often better. Does the timing of my spell allow me to cast it later, right? If it's my own counter spell, then I cannot maybe use it usefully later, especially stuff like Daze that gets weaker later. But for example, if I have a Snuff Out in hand, then maybe I just can untap in my own turn with my open mana, and there is no negative consequence to playing around Daze. Then how many non-land cards do I have in hand, right? If I have a lot of lands in hand and only 1 business spell, then maybe I can wait. However, we also have to consider if I wait too long, the opponent could just Thoughtseize away the spells. How many lands does my opponent have, and can I do something else instead, right? Like I said, like Wasteland or Crack a Clue. Underground Sea, Tamiyo. Always push it, right? If they daze or force, we have a problem, but I think Thoughtseizing feels so bad.
Yeah, agree.
Flooded Strand into Thoughtseize, Underground Sea.
It depends on what you want to fetch after. You want to go for an Underground Sea, or do you want to go for a basic Swarm, for example?
I don't really want to go for basic Swarm. If they Wasteland me, it's fine. And I want to go for Brainstorm maybe next turn.
Yeah, then sure.
And I mean, it's possible I play into days here, but just so bad, I think, to Thoughtseize into Tamiyo, then they just
Yeah,
replay the
but
stuff.
if he plays a daze, then it's fine because he loses one land and we have the land advantage, and he needs lands to use his clues. So it's only then bad if he has a daze and an uncontested brainstorm.
I mean, but we don't have a threat, so I would be fine with him dazing if we had like 2 Nethergoyfs and then we could
Yeah.
push the speed right now. I think that Tamiyo is really deadly. Alright, Katara.
So it works like this: if our opponent plays spells on our turn, it gets counters, and if the creature attacks, then he can draw X cards, where X is the number of counters, and then he has to loot at least one card to discard. Okay, so for now he is just drawing 0 cards and has to discard.
So I think I'm starting with the Thoughtseize because I don't want to give him a really juicy daze here.
No, I don't agree. I want here I would like to play the brainstorm because our opponent is maybe an Orcish Bowmaster deck, and we have a safe timing to apply our brainstorm, and we really need to improve our hand. And we can sword size after it. But I'm not thinking that he's maybe dazing a sword size, and even if he does, it's a good trade because you trade 1 for 1, and our opponent will lose 1 land count in the exchange.
But now I want to push it because this is a snowball threat.
It's tempting, yeah, sure.
Because the opponent didn't daze the turn before, so I think they don't have daze now. Okay, they do have daze now. So either they like didn't have the daze,
Or they didn't want to spend it, maybe.
that's
But I
also
think the exchange is fine. We trade 1 for 1, and we are up 1 land count, which will matter. And our opponent is operating from a basic swarm, so he has likely problems maybe in casting Murktide on his own.
But the big problem is this Katara is a snowball threat, right? If this ever gets like 1 more, like even now it's super strong, like looting on every turn. It's like Dragon's Rage Chandler similar, but if they like have a force or another daze or something, this can get out of hand really, really quickly. So I think next turn I definitely want to Thoughtseize into the Murktide.
Yeah, sure.
So they don't want the Wasteland. That's interesting.
Yeah, because they are behind on land count of the days. They are really scared about it. I think it was the reason why they don't daze on Tamiyo, because they keep in mind that they are behind 1 land when they are especially on the draw, on the play.
So now Thoughtseize them and Murktide, right? We have to
Sure.
we have to push the tempo here. So I think we don't care about Katara, so we take the brainstorm.
Yeah, especially with Tamiyo on the board. And I think now the game should be in our favor.
Yeah, as long as they don't find, I mean, if they find a present, then game's probably over, but...
Yeah, we are not so far away from casting Kaito, so...
Oh, that's a good point, yeah. That's a really good point. That's only 2 more turns.
And maybe if we draw untapped land, we can apply Kaito. We know they just have Katara, they can cycle. And here the question is what card we want to block down.
The Katara, definitely, because...
I'm not sure. They have 1 unknown card and they need at least to apply 1 more card in our turn. I would prefer to get rid of the Tamiyo.
But if they found another brainstorm, then...
We just sword-sized 1 brainstorm, so it's really unlikely that they have maybe another brainstorm, but sure.
No, they also have another draw with the Katara. So I would like to block this one.
Okay.
Because can get out of hand, like at least the clues, they have to decide, correct the clue, or because they're limited on mana, so they have to decide if they spend the mana on the second Katara or on the clue token. So it's possible. Alright, now they exile. This also exiles, right? So this would have been really bad if we had blocked here.
Sure, because he go for the... Yeah, exactly. I didn't see it.
I mean, I didn't also, but I guess you just attack. And later in the same game, something interesting comes up. I'm attacking with Murktide Regent and hardcast Kaito's second main opponent responsive with Force of Will. And there's also an interesting daze play. Can you see it? Can pause if you need a second. And again, it's the Daze Wasteland trick. I'm not sure if it's even necessary. I mean, we could also just pitch cast the daze using the force, right? But here in this case the opponent has no cards in hand, so they can't daze back. So we decide here to go for the wasteland on the delta with the force on the stack, and then we daze the force. Okay, I think this is all for today. It's already quite long, the guide, so please tell me if you want the second part, but soon there's a ban announcement, so I hope all this work on the guide and the written guide is not for nothing. Let's hope Tamiyo survives, or if Tamiyo is gone, the deck survives. So yeah, please, I'm really interested in your feedback. It is a lot of work to make such a guide. So if you need, if you prefer a guide, or if you just prefer like 3 or 4 or 5 leaks, it's maybe the same amount of effort. So yeah, please write what you prefer. Do you rather have like one guide every 1 or 2 weeks, or would you rather just have like 3 or 4 leak videos? Okay, this is all. See you later.